I'd just like to share the horror experience my family went through. Are you familiar with Japan's surplus stores? They're places where you can buy secondhand items from Japan at very low prices. They're popular because the products are affordable yet often high quality. It's somewhat like a thrift store, but in many cases the items are even better. My family loves shopping there, especially my mom. She is particularly fond of the household items because she says they have beautiful designs and are very durable. There's a branch near us in Bulacan, and she would often stop by whenever she went out. We never had any problem with her shopping there. Until one day she brought home something that would bring fear and danger into our house. One afternoon, Mom went out to the market and left me at home with my two siblings, my older brother and our youngest sister, who was only 2 years old at the time. Our father was working abroad, so it was just the four of us living together. After a few hours, Mom returned, and we helped her sort out the things she bought. While unpacking, I noticed a Japanese geisha doll. It was beautifully crafted, with intricate details, and placed inside a wooden glass case. It looked expensive and elegant. If you're not familiar with what a geisha doll looks like, you can easily search it online. What I didn't mention earlier is that my mom has loved collecting dolls since she was a child. In fact, we have a cabinet in our living room filled with her collection. Our youngest sister also loved dolls, so it was a hobby they sort of shared. When Mom saw me admiring the doll, she excitedly told me she couldn't resist buying it because it was beautiful and surprisingly cheap. She had always wanted a doll like that and thought it would look perfect on display in the living room. I nodded and showed it to my little sister. Usually, whenever Mom bought a new doll, my sister would immediately grab it and play with it before it was displayed. But that time, she just stared at it. When I tried to hand it to her, she firmly shook her head and turned away to grab some bread Mom had brought home instead. I didn't think much of it. Mom lightly cleaned the doll and placed it inside the cabinet in the living room. I assumed that was the end of it. But in the following days, I started noticing something strange. The house felt heavy, like the air itself had weight. It hadn't felt like that before. There was an uneasy energy I couldn't explain. One time, my brother and I were alone at home. He mentioned that the living room seemed darker than usual. He couldn't pinpoint what had changed, but he felt something was off. I didn't tell him what I'd been feeling, but deep down I knew we sensed the same thing. Still, we brushed it off. Then, one early morning, something happened to me. I woke up needing to use the bathroom. The house was quiet. Everyone was asleep. To get to the bathroom, I had to pass through the living room. The lights there were off, though the kitchen light was on. As I hurried through the living room, I suddenly froze. Near the cabinet, I thought I saw someone standing there, a woman wearing traditional Japanese clothing. To be more specific, she looked exactly like the geisha doll Mom had bought. Thinking I might just be imagining things, I looked again. No one was there. I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But just as I was about to continue to the bathroom, I noticed something else. The geisha doll was no longer inside the cabinet. It was on the floor, still inside its wooden glass case. I was confused. No one had touched it. My little sister never played with it, and my brother had no interest in Mom's collection. I didn't dwell on it. I picked it up, placed it back in the cabinet, used the bathroom, and went back to sleep. 2 days later, I had another experience. I had no classes that day. Mom went out with my little sister, and my brother was at school. I was alone at home, sitting in the living room around 2 in the afternoon, scrolling through Facebook. At first, everything felt normal, but after a while, I started feeling like someone was watching me. I looked up, thinking someone had arrived, but no one was there. Still, the feeling didn't go away. It wasn't just that someone was watching. It felt like someone was staring. When I finally looked up again, my heart skipped a beat. The geisha doll's case had somehow turned and was now facing directly toward me. I was sure it hadn't been positioned that way before. Swallowing my fear, I stood up and turned it back to its original position. Again, I tried to ignore it. Then one Sunday afternoon, around 1 o'clock, my brother and I were in the living room while Mom was washing dishes in the kitchen. We were talking when we noticed our little sister stand up and stare at the cabinet. At first, we thought she was just looking at the dolls as usual. But after several minutes, she was still standing there, staring intently at one specific doll. the geisha doll. My brother approached her and asked if she wanted him to take it down so she could play with it. She suddenly stepped back and, in broken words, said we should throw it away. She was only 2, so her speech wasn't clear, but we understood her. My brother pointed at the geisha doll to confirm, and she nodded. I asked her why we should throw it away. Without taking her eyes off the doll, she said she was scared because it was moving. My brother and I exchanged confused looks. Just then, Mom came into the living room and asked what was going on. When we explained and told her our sister wanted the doll thrown away, Mom tried to convince us that maybe our sister just didn't like it. She said it would be a waste to throw it away. We had no choice but to drop it. That night, our little sister developed a high fever. It was so severe that she cried non-stop and none of us could sleep. Mom kept tending to her. At one point, she went to the kitchen to re-wet a cloth for her forehead, leaving my brother and me in the bedroom with our sister. As I gently rubbed her arm, she suddenly tightened her grip on my hand and pointed toward the living room. Our bedroom door faced the living room. In broken words, she said the doll was there, looking at us. She cried even harder. My brother immediately carried her. When Mom returned, we closed the bedroom door so our sister wouldn't be able to see the living room and eventually fall asleep. After hearing everything, Mom finally decided to throw the doll away the next day. The plan was to include it with the trash for the garbage truck. But the next morning, the doll was gone. It wasn't in the cabinet. Mom asked if my brother or I had already thrown it away or hidden it. We hadn't. We searched the entire house but couldn't find it anywhere. A day passed. Mom said maybe it had finally left. But my brother and I still felt that heavy presence in the house. And our little sister still wasn't recovering, even though Mom was carefully giving her medicine. On the 3rd day, I was sitting beside my sister's bed when something brushed against my foot. It was the doll. It was under her bed. We had searched that exact spot before and found nothing. I immediately grabbed it and showed Mom and my brother. Without hesitation, they wrapped it up and threw it away. As soon as the doll was gone, the air in the house felt lighter. Almost like magic, our little sister recovered. My brother later said that maybe the doll had caused everything. Maybe it was angry at our sister for sensing something was wrong and wanting it gone. To this day, we don't know what happened to that geisha doll. I just hope it truly ended up in the garbage and that no one else ever finds it. I just want to share my experience with the supernatural. I don't expect this to be read right away, but I hope you can give it time and share it with your listeners. This is about an item my husband and I bought from a well-known place that many people visit, the Japan Surplus. At first, what we bought seemed perfectly fine. We never expected that our simple purchase would come with a terrifying plot twist. Let me start from the beginning. It was a Saturday morning when I invited my husband to go to town to shop. We needed a few appliances for the house. By the way, we already have one child, a 3-year-old boy. He's an only child, so my husband spoils him a lot. That day, before we left our son, Pat, his nickname, with my mother. Our first stop in town was the grocery store, and our last stop was the Japan Surplus. I told my husband that it was a good place to look for items, because aside from being budget-friendly, the quality was often very good. My husband doesn't usually like going to places like that since he rarely shops there. But when he saw the interior, items neatly displayed, some stacked, some scattered around for sale, he quickly wandered off to explore. He found several things he liked and was choosing between them, so I left him for a while to continue browsing on my own. After a few hours, he approached me, looking excited. He said he wanted to buy the children's bicycle displayed near the entrance. He pointed it out, and I followed his gaze. He explained that since Pat already knew how to ride a bike, he wanted to buy it for him. He felt sorry whenever he saw Pat watching the other kids outside ride their bikes. Sometimes Pat would just borrow from other children. My husband added that the price was much lower than what we'd find elsewhere, and after inspecting it closely, he said it was still in very good condition. It only needed minor adjustments. He kept convincing me until I finally agreed, and we bought the bicycle. When we arrived home, even from a distance, Pat was already jumping with excitement when he saw it. However, we didn't let him use it immediately. My husband wanted to check and fix the parts first to make sure everything was safe. It was better to avoid any accidents. When Pat finally started using the bicycle, he rode it only in the garage. He was allowed outside only if one of us was with him. We didn't let him roam around the subdivision alone because there were many vehicles passing by, and it was too dangerous for him. Everything was fine at first. Until one Sunday morning around 8:30 a.m., something strange happened. Pat was in the garage riding his bike while my husband watched him. I was in the kitchen cooking. For just a brief moment, my husband went inside the house to get something, leaving Pat alone. It was only for a few seconds. When my husband came back, he was shocked. Pat was no longer in the garage. We saw him out on the street, riding the bike at full speed. He was screaming and clearly panicking. He said he couldn't control it. I rushed out of the kitchen while my husband ran toward him. The bicycle was moving incredibly fast, and I was terrified. Thankfully, one of our neighbors managed to stop it before something worse happened. We thanked our neighbor and brought both Pat and the bicycle back into the garage. When we asked Pat what happened, he said the bike suddenly sped up on its own and he couldn't control it. We convinced ourselves it was just an accident. Maybe he had pedaled too hard or lost control. We warned him not to go near the street again and didn't dwell on it any further. About a week later, I had my own experience. I work from home, so I'm usually awake late at night and into the early morning, working on my laptop and talking to clients. One early morning around 2:30 a.m., I was working in the living room. Directly across from the living room is the garage, visible through sliding windows. I had just finished talking to a client and removed my headphones, planning to get some water from the kitchen, when I heard noises coming from the garage. I can't fully describe the sound, but I was certain it was coming from there. I stood up, walked toward the window, and peeked outside. The garage light was on so I could see clearly. I froze. Pat's bicycle was moving on its own, circling around the garage as if someone invisible was riding it. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I must be imagining it. Goosebumps covered my skin. I immediately went to our bedroom and woke my husband. I told him what I had seen. Though still half asleep, he forced himself to get up and check. He looked out the window first. But when we both peeked into the garage, everything was normal. The bicycle was parked exactly where Pat always left it. I tried explaining what I had seen, but my husband looked unsure whether to believe me or laugh it off. I even questioned myself. Was I just exhausted? Was my mind playing tricks on me? Instead of continuing my work, I decided to rest because I couldn't focus anymore. 2 days later, it happened again. This time, it was around midnight. I stood up to get something from the bedroom when I heard the same familiar noises from the garage. I knew then that it wasn't just exhaustion. Despite the fear in my chest, I slowly walked toward the sliding window. The bicycle was moving again. But this time it wasn't empty. There was a child riding it. The child had slanted eyes, very fair skin, jet black hair, and looked to be about the same age as our son. I can't describe what I felt in that moment. My whole body turned cold. I stepped back and rushed to the kitchen, drinking water and trying to calm myself. When I gathered enough courage to look again, everything was normal. No child. The bicycle was parked where it had been left. This happened several more times. Eventually, my husband became convinced that something was wrong with the bicycle. One day, while we were eating at the dining table, our son suddenly spoke up. Innocently, he said that there was a child in the garage who played with him. He said the child would ride the bicycle with him. When he said that, he looked completely unaware of anything strange. My husband and I exchanged glances. We thought he was done talking, but then he added something that shocked us. He said he didn't want the bicycle anymore because it wasn't his. He said it belonged to the other child. He didn't want to take it because the child would become sad. We didn't know what to say. In the end, we agreed to what he wanted. Honestly, I also wanted the bicycle gone because I was already terrified by my experiences. After dinner, my husband and I talked seriously and decided to sell the bicycle to a nearby junk shop for a very low price. I know it hurt him to let it go. It was his gift to our son, but we both knew it was necessary. Not just for my peace of mind, but for the safety of our child and our entire family. Ever since I was young, my mother and grandmother have loved shopping at thrift stores. especially Japan Surplus. They're particularly fond of the appliances and household items sold there because they suit our home. Since they're older, they prefer antique, sturdy, and long-lasting pieces. As we all know, Japanese-made items are known for their durability and quality. In fact, most of the things in our house came from Japan Surplus. You could even say our home looks like it belongs to a Japanese family, because nearly everything came from there. At first, I never saw anything wrong with it. Everything seemed completely normal. But then there came a time when I suddenly remembered how Japan is often associated with stories of active spirits and eerie urban legends. You've probably heard some of them. Japan is known for its ghost stories, some even more terrifying than the ones we have here in the Philippines. One day, my mother and grandmother came home with two men carrying a large wardrobe cabinet. It was tall and wide, made of solid wood. The inside was especially eye-catching because of the many compartments and sections where clothes and other belongings could be stored. When my grandmother approached me, she was smiling brightly. She told me that the cabinet was my new closet for my bedroom. She said I had too many clothes already and nowhere to properly store them. I didn't even have my own cabinet, just a small drawer. So while they were out, they decided to buy it for me. I was beyond happy and excited. As soon as the cabinet was brought into my room, I immediately cleaned it and spent hours arranging my clothes and belongings inside. It was so spacious that even after organizing everything, there was still plenty of room left. A few days later, however, my excitement slowly turned into fear. It started one night while I was sitting at my study area, reviewing for school. Suddenly, one of the cabinet doors, the one on the right side, slowly creaked open. The sound it made was unsettling, like something straight out of a horror movie. I looked at it, thinking maybe it had just opened naturally. Perhaps it hadn't been closed properly. I stood up, walked over, and shut it firmly before returning to my studies. About 5 minutes later, I heard it open again. When I looked this time, I nearly jumped out of my seat. Both doors were now wide open, revealing the dark interior of the cabinet. I felt chills, but I swallowed my fear and walked toward it again. I closed both doors and stood there for several minutes, watching carefully to see if they would open again. When nothing happened, I returned to my desk. In the following days, things became even stranger. I would wake up in the morning to find the cabinet doors open again. You might think someone had entered my room and taken something, but that wasn't possible. I always locked my bedroom door before sleeping. My family also had the habit of knocking before entering, so I would know if anyone had come inside. I couldn't find any logical explanation. Then one night, around 1 a.m., I was studying on my laptop for an exam the next day. The cabinet was positioned slightly to my side. Not too close, but close enough that I could see it from the corner of my eye. While typing, I suddenly frowned because I noticed something from the corner of my vision. A shadow, a dark figure, quickly passing and heading straight toward the cabinet. If I wasn't mistaken, it looked like the shadow of a child. I immediately turned my head toward the cabinet. Slowly, the doors began to open again. I tried convincing myself it was normal. Maybe the hinges were loose. I stood up and walked over to close it. But as I reached for the doors, I felt like something moved inside. I flinched. After a few seconds of hesitation, I looked inside the cabinet. Aside from my clothes and belongings, there was nothing there. About 4 days passed after that incident. One night around 11 p.m., I was sorting through old papers because someone had asked my grandmother if we had any they could use. Since I no longer needed them, we decided to give them away. That was the only free time I had, so I was organizing them in my room while reviewing. Suddenly, I froze. I heard the voice of a young boy coming from inside the cabinet. He was crying. Then I clearly heard him say, "Please, let me out." I could hear his soft sobbing. Then I heard knocking, coming from inside the cabinet, like someone was trapped and trying desperately to get out. Terrified, I ran out of my room and woke up my mother and grandmother. I told them everything that happened. When they saw how pale and frightened I was, my grandmother said that maybe there was a soul trapped inside that cabinet. The next morning, without hesitation, they moved the cabinet to our old storage shed behind the house. We could have thrown it away or given it to someone else, but we were afraid that whoever received it might experience the same terrifying events. Until now, the cabinet remains in our storage room. And sometimes, we still hear him. The boy occasionally makes his presence known, crying softly and asking for help, begging to be released from that old cabinet.